a few different case studies that came directly from a few of our audit reports to highlight basically how these findings start and put them all the way through the audit resolution process. That way you can see these findings from nuts to bolts. So in this first case study, we'll focus on travel findings that were identified at a U.S. institution of higher education. The audit encompassed about $258 million over a 3-year audit period. The first finding that we're looking at is for just over $20,000 in unallowable travel expenses. The condition that we found in this finding related to 3 different audit awards that were charged for travel expenses that did not benefit the award that they were charged, or they took place after the award's expiration date. This specifically had to do with foreign travel right before award expiration, foreign travel charged to an award that it didn't benefit, foreign travel purchased a day before the award, but that doesn't take place until about a year later. As we all know, each of those instances is unallowable per the uniform guidance. In this instance, the university did agree with this finding, and NSF's audit resolution team ultimately sustained the finding. The second finding, though, for just over $2,600 in unsupported travel expenses, this related to supporting documentation that wasn't legible. The university was unable to identify the traveler's name, the location of travel, or the travel dates within the supporting documentation that they provided to our auditors. When this ended up in the audit report, the university disagreed with the audit finding. What they were able to provide was a credit card statement, which they believed, in conjunction with the PI's explanation, would be sufficient to make this cost allowable. They also reiterated throughout this process the travel benefit of the award. This was one of those times where we agree to disagree, and when it got to audit resolution, NSF ultimately ended up concurring with the auditors and sustaining the finding, stating that it was an unsupportable cost. This third finding that we have is, again, for unallowable travel, but this time it has to do with upgraded travel. In only a few circumstances is business class travel allowable, and then oftentimes universities have their own specific policies for business class travel. It's important to note that our auditors not only look at uniform guidance and other federal regulations as well as NSF's rules and policies, but they will look at the university's policies and ensure that all costs are compliant with the university's own policies. In this instance, business class travel was charged to the award that did not qualify under their own policies or the uniform guidance, and ultimately they ended up agreeing with the auditors that this was unallowable, and NSF sustained the finding. The key takeaways from this case study is that travel at the end of the award will receive extra scrutiny from our auditors. To help ensure that you don't have to expend unnecessary resources during an audit, we recommend training staff to document why travel at the end of the award is necessary, reasonable, and actually benefits the award. If you have a clear documentation that identifies each of those different facets, it's easy for us to look at that and review it and move on rather than having lots of back and forth and potentially seeing these costs end up in an audit report. And finally, business class travel will also always receive extra scrutiny from the auditors. So anytime that comes through, please make sure that it meets all the criteria within the uniform guidance and complies with all university policy, as well as being well documented.
Hey, Ken, I'm going to jump in for a second with a comment and let you take a breath. I think your point about NSF OIG looking at the institution's policies is very important. We actually had a situation here several years ago where there was a policy statement in our travel policy that said all foreign travel had to have prior approval of the provost office, and we were audited, and the auditor was looking at that and said, well, where's this approval? And when we went to our procurement office and that reviewed that and asked, they said, oh, well, we just have that in there so that we can require it if there's an issue. We don't actually enforce it under normal circumstances. So it's like, okay, that's a big problem. We don't need to have something stated as a policy if it's not something that we're going to enforce, because we're going to be held to comply with it by our auditors.
No, that's a great point, Cindy. That's definitely something that our auditors look for when they go out. So excellent point. To highlight one of the risks that we oftentimes see at universities that they don't necessarily need to take on.